Michael Brown was nominated by President Bush to a number of Homeland Security positions and twice confirmed by the Senate.
Earlier this evening, I spoke with Mike Brown, the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He's coordinating disaster relief of a dozen federal agencies and the American Red Cross.
All right, former FEMA Director Michael Brown, thank you so much for joining us.
Michael Brown, former FEMA Director. Thank you, Michael, as always.
And now, The Michael Brown Show on BCR.
Welcome to The Michael Brown Show on BravoCharlieReady.com, a part of the Blue Cell, which you can find at thebluecell.com, and you can also find Bravo Charlie Ready at BravoCharlieReady.com. This video podcast today, I wanted to talk a little bit about a virtual 9/11 and how the transformation of terror organization complicates this long war that we're having. Now, I want to back up for just a moment and talk about something that still sticks with me about what happened on September 11, 2001. If you recall that day, and I'm amazed at the number of people that I talked to that, considering how long ago it's been, that as new generations come forward, more and more people don't really understand the impact of that day, nor do they understand, and I don't expect people to understand any more than the best that I can do to understand anything about the tragedy of Pearl Harbor is to understand from talking to people and listening to people about how horrific that day was on December 7. And I think the further we get away from 9/11, the more that we have a somewhat similar reaction. People don't really comprehend the emotional impact that day had. So what I want to try to do a little bit today is talk about what occurred on 9/11, how that occurred, but how the time period that has gone by since September 11, 2001 has really transformed the war on terror. But I want to tie it to something that really sticks with me and that really bothers me, because the war on terror, to a certain extent, not so much as it has in the past, but I think still to a certain extent, has taken away from what I believe is the most important thing that we can do as people involved in crisis management or emergency management, and that is to understand the all hazards approach. And the all hazards approach, let's apply it specifically to 9/11. In speeches that I give around the country, oftentimes talking to people about that particular day, I'll ask them, what if on September 11, it was a gorgeous Tuesday morning, what if on that day, instead of hijackers taking those planes and flying them into the towers, what if there had actually been a failure of the ATC, of the air traffic control system? What if for some reason transponders weren't working or radar wasn't working, or, just any number of things had caused the pilot of the first plane to fly into that first tower? What would FEMA, this is prior to DHS, what would FEMA, the FDNY, the fire department, or the NYPD, the police department, or the Emergency Management Operations Center in Lower Manhattan, what would they have done differently? Probably nothing. Virtually nothing would have changed. The response would have been the same. The urban search and rescue teams would have been deployed. The medical teams would have been deployed. We would have started trying to clear debris as best we could to try to find survivors. All of that is because of the all hazards approach. But because it was a terror incident, there were on the margins differences in the response. Let me give you an example. One of the things that we had to do was to coordinate with the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI, and in particular the FBI, and to a lesser degree, the New York Police Department, because it was a crime scene. Because after everything had occurred, we knew that it was a crime scene. So we did everything that we could to make certain that all of the debris removal was done in a very methodical way. So we had GPS on trucks as they would go into the pit. We would track those trucks as they would go over to the pier. Those trucks would then load onto the barges that would then take it to the landfill in Staten Island called Fresh Kills. And at Fresh Kills, we had set up, first of all, I mean, fire trucks, cars, the rebar, the steel, everything, all of those were put into different piles. But then we would start going through all of the smaller things, trying to locate as best we could, identifying things like driver's licenses or key cards or anything that might help us identify a victim so that we could eventually get that material back to either the next of kin or, if there had been survivors, back to the survivors. So it was this very methodical sorting of the debris down to the most minute piece that we would find. Thumbs, hands, arms. I mean, not to be too grotesque, but that's what we were doing. We were sorting it out. So other than that, the all hazards approach that we took to the response on 9/11 is exactly the same that we would do today, regardless of the cause of the crisis. And I think that's the point that I initially want to get across before I talk about how terror itself has transformed this long war that we have been in, fighting terror since 9/11, actually since long before that, since 1993 and the first attempt to bomb the World Trade Center. But how has the war on terror changed? In the years since 9/11, all of these technological advances, including the explosion of social media and the encrypted recesses of what we call the dark web, have actually taken terror recruitment and incitement beyond borders. Recruitment's just not occurring in Yemen. Recruitment's just not occurring in Baghdad. Recruitment is now occurring all over the world. In fact, recruitment is probably occurring wherever you're listening or watching this podcast right now. In this landscape, the Taliban, let's take the Taliban for example. They used to ban television in the era of their brutal rule, but they now actually have their own production studio. That's how much it's changed. They've recognized that, yeah, maybe we don't want Afghanis or tribes or different groups watching television, but the Taliban itself has its own incredible production studio for the sole purpose of recruitment. El Amara is now churning out propaganda videos carried out on a 5-language website along with a regular magazine production and a spokesperson on Twitter. Now, Twitter takes them off and then they get back on a different form, but it's this constant back and forth fighting terror on social media. Now, while Al-Qaeda continues to crank out fresh material such as their women's magazine, Your Home, the terror group's propaganda classics, from the lectures of Anwar al-Awlaki, now gone, to the recipes for explosives, the tactical advice in their glossy magazines, all of those are often cited or utilized by homegrown jihadists who pledge allegiance to ISIS, for example. And while cranking out official propaganda ranging from beheading videos to photo spreads of jihadists enjoying ice cream, ISIS has given rise to an army of independent propagandists equipped with bloodlust, spare time, and this incredible knack for using Photoshop. They have adopted, you think about all of the technology around here, they've been able to adopt that to their own uses. Now, while there hasn't been another attack since 9/11, at least on that grand scale, of course we've had terror attacks since 9/11, London, Paris, all over the world, even in the United States. It hasn't been on that scale. And while Al-Qaeda's job application that was recovered from Osama bin Laden's hideout in Abbottabad included screening questions, actually had screening questions about the would-be jihadists' terror, history, health, hobbies, the recruitment that Al-Qaeda uses today is much deeper. Students, IT experts, security guards, the U.S. military, you name it, all at the same time, shallow in terms of skills as terror groups, they have now embraced come-as-you-are recruits and simple attacks. It's disheartening to recognize that things that might go on in a club somewhere, we have a difficult understanding that really is a terror attack meant to, whether it's a lone wolf or a clean skin, that is designed to instill fear in either a subset of American population or to make the general American population more concerned and more fearful that what happened in that nightclub, in the Pulse nightclub, for example, might happen in a nightclub that you're going to. That's the purpose of terror. Now, through this development of a fast online network of resources, as simple as posters or as complex as ebooks or hour-long feature films, terror groups have nurtured homegrown violent extremism into the borderless menace that we face today. The FBI director, Christopher Wray, warned last year that, quote, thanks largely to terror groups' innovative use of social media, radicalization is occurring at younger and younger ages of operatives, mostly born in the United States. And their ethnicities are all over the map. He then added, they're hard to identify because there's no profile of a typical homegrown violent terrorist. Now, some ways in which terror groups and their lone operatives are continually shaping the landscape include psychological warfare, diverse recruitment, training without a terror cramp, softer targets, simpler weapons, fresh tactics, an online wealth of materials, cyber ops that they use for online training to hacking. All of those are kind of the new ways now that terror groups are using what you and I take for granted. I mean, you can't see everything, but I'm sitting here with a couple of laptops. I'm sitting here talking to my Mevo camera. I'm doing this in a very simple way. It doesn't take, I don't have to go to a television studio. I'm sitting right here in the offices of the Blue Cell of BravoCharlieReady.com, a great facility where we have our interactive training center. I'm sitting here doing this video podcast with the most simplest of material, and yet it's the kind of quality that if you're trying to attract somebody, if you're trying to attract a clean skin or a lone wolf, you can do it with the very simple setup that I have right here. So this asymmetrical warfare that we have now taken on, or that we haven't taken on, but that we are now facing, I think it's incumbent upon us as people involved in emergency management and crisis management to understand that on the law enforcement side, their job has become even more difficult, which means that on the crisis management side, on that whole cycle of emergency management of preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, that we now have to bring in all of those people on the crisis management side where they're doing the intel work, where they're trying to understand the recruitment of the clean skins. Maybe I should explain what a clean skin is. One of the things that terror groups like to do is they like to find individuals that are already here, for example, in the United States, but it might be France, it might be Britain, it might be Australia, any number of places where they can recruit individuals that are either already citizens or maybe in the United States already have a green card and they're already working. They're working at an airport, for example. One of the airports, I consider airports to still be one of the most vulnerable assets, one of the most vulnerable infrastructures that we have in the United States. And on a separate podcast, I'll explain all of that. I think most of you probably know the vulnerabilities that exist at airports, but I do want to talk about that at a later point. But let me get back to clean skins for a second. So this clean skin is an individual that's already in the country. They don't have a criminal record. They're flying under the radar. They've got a job. From everything that we can tell, so they might be from Somalia. They might be from Yemen. But we have no reason, because they have no ties in those countries that they came from, they have no ties to a terror organization. No family member, no relatives, nothing. They're clean skins. They came here. And let's make the assumption, probably incorrectly, but let's make the assumption that they came to the United States the proper way. They got a visa. Once they got the visa, they got here, they got a green card, they got a job, they're productive members of society. so to speak. They're paying their taxes. They're filing their taxes. They're doing all of the things that we would expect immigrants to this country to do. But they're disaffected. They're lonely. They're by themselves. They see the difference between this incredible country that we live in with all of the incredible things that we have. And they start comparing it to the place they came from. And then perhaps they see the political battles that we're fighting. They see the fights between Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, whatever it might be. Or they might see how open our society is, our acceptance of people that perhaps are gay or they're transsexual or minorities, whatever it might be. But they see this open society where we're accepting of one another. They see the freedom of religion that we have, that we exercise every day. And it starts to piss them off. They start to realize that maybe we are the great Satan and that maybe our way of life isn't right. And so all of those teachings that they had as young people, teachings from the Quran, teachings from whatever it might be from whatever mosque that they were attending, they come here. They're happy and they're settled. They're clean skins. They're flying under the radar of law enforcement. But then they go online. They go online to Twitter, Facebook. They go onto the dark web. And the next thing you know, they're starting to get recruited. Very subtly. But they start reading the online magazines of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS. They start reading Hamas, Hezbollah. They start seeing videos. They start seeing podcasts, just like this podcast, except I'm not advocating violence. I'm not advocating terrorism. But they start seeing those things. And fairly soon, they start getting radicalized. So now that psychological warfare, that diverse recruitment, that actual training without a terror camp, they can all do virtually, just as I'm doing all of this virtually. They can start getting radicalized just in the same way. Think about it this way. You and I have this plethora of news sources that we can turn to. And I know that sometimes we get caught in our particular bubble, and so we start focusing on that particular bubble of news. They're no different than the rest of us. They start getting their news from Yemen or Iraq or Afghanistan or Iran or any other place. And they get in that bubble. And that clean skin starts getting radicalized. And as that clean skin starts getting radicalized and they start realizing just how easy it is for them to get the information about how bad this country is, they become more and more radicalized. So in conclusion, I would just offer this. As you and I involved in emergency management and crisis management, I know that there's this sometimes loggerhead because as emergency managers, we want to work collaboratively. Well, here's a way for us to work collaboratively with those on the law enforcement side. And that is to understand that they are fighting an asymmetrical battle that you and I aren't fighting. That's their job. Our job is to prepare, respond, to recover, and to mitigate. Their response is to keep it from happening. But when it does happen, then we've got to be ready to work with them. I give a speech oftentimes on resilience, and I don't want to go into that now, but when I talk about resilience, I talk about building a network. So as we begin to understand the asymmetrical warfare that these groups are engaged in, and as we begin to understand the kind of battle that they are being trained for, I think it's incumbent upon us to work closer and closer as we can with those involved in law enforcement so that if the intelligence agency, and I hate to use the word failure, but if the intelligence agency fail or miss a clean skin somewhere that is hell-bent on blowing up a nightclub or shooting up a nightclub or a lone wolf that's going to go shoot up a church or whatever it might be, let's develop those relationships. let's make certain it's not just theoretical. That's the point I'm trying to get across. It is not just theoretical. It is the idea that we can sit in a fusion center, we can sit in an ops center, we can go through all of the motions. But when the proverbial you-know-what hits the fan, who are you going to call? I want every single person involved in emergency management and crisis management to have a broad network of people on the law enforcement side, on the intel side, so that when something bad does happen, it's not that you're meeting for the first time. You've trained together, you've exercised together. If nothing else, you have carved out time at a conference to sit down and get to know those people, whether it be in your municipality, in your FEMA region, in your state, whatever the jurisdiction might be, or in adjacent counties, that you get to know those people. Understand who those people are and develop a relationship with them. I'm so adamant about that because with the experience that I had through all the different disasters that I had to respond to and coordinate in my almost 6 years in the Bush administration, the one most important lesson that I learned, and you can put this in the category of resilience, is don't allow that collaborative relationship that FEMA and emergency responders had. Don't let that wither on the vine. Reinvigorate that. Understand that they're fighting asymmetrical warfare. We're still in the collaborative business. We're still in the emergency response business. Figure out a way to make that work together. Thanks for listening to this video podcast today. It's brought to you by the Blue Cell at thebluecell.com and Bravo Charlie Ready, bravocharlieready.com. If you'd like to email me, it's michaelbrown@thebluecell.com, michaelbrown@thebluecell.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you about ideas, about stories or things that you'd like to hear about. Whenever I give speeches around the country, it invariably, the Q&A session turns out to be almost as long, if not longer, than the presentation that I make. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to email me, michaelbrown@thebluecell.com. Sign up, bravocharlieready.com. The Blue Cell, if we can provide training and exercises or do anything to help you in your organization, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that it gets to the right person. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you. We'll be doing these regularly, and I'll talk to you again next week. Take care.